Hi, welcome back. In our previous lesson, we started with a practice question on intertemporal choice. Today, we are moving on to part 2. So, we are considering a consumer named Nate. Our third question here is calculate how much Nate would borrow or save during the first month. Now, we know Nate's utility function as this, and we know Nate's intertemporal budget constraint as this. So if we treat the consumer's optimization problem exactly as if it were two goods, C1 and C2, then given the intertemporal budget constraint, the price of C1 is going to be equal to 1. So we can assume that there's a 1 here that is invisible, and then the price of C2 is going to be 1 divided by 1.2. We can see that this is similar to writing a typical budget constraint, which is the price of good X multiplied by good X plus the price of good Y multiplied by good Y being equal to the income. So this bit here is net income, but in this case, we are considering two periods. So this is for period 1 and this is for period 2. And then this bit here, if we consider C1 as good X, then the price of good X is going to be 1. And then if we consider C2 as good Y, then the price of good Y is going to be what is multiplying here. So that's why we said the price of C1 is equal to 1 and the price of C2 is going to be equal to 1 divided by 1.2. So let's keep this in mind as we progress with our calculation. To find the amount that Nate saves or borrows in the first month, we have to find his consumption. So in this example, we'll be assuming that there's an interior solution. So we can just go ahead and use the tangency condition we have found in our previous lessons, which is the marginal utility of good X divided by marginal utility of good Y being equal to price of good X divided by the price of good Y. So this is our tangency condition or our equilibrium condition whenever there is an interior solution. So broadly, we can write this as the marginal utility of C1 divided by marginal utility of C2 equal to price of C1 divided by price of C2. Now, the assumption of interior solution is very important here because without this assumption, we will need to prove that the preferences are convex and there is no corner solution before we can progress to use the tangency condition here. Marginal utility of C1 is the differentiation of the utility function with respect to C1. So this is 1 divided by C1. Then the marginal utility of C2 is differentiation of the utility function with respect to C2. This is 0.6 divided by C2. So let's use this information to write our tangency condition. So we have the marginal utility of C1 divided by the marginal utility of C2. And this should be equal to the price of C1, which is 1, divided by the price of C2, which is 1 divided by 1.2. So this can be simplified to be C2 divided by 0.6 C1 being equal to 1.2. So then with this, we can write C2 as 0.72 C1. Now our aim is to find whether Nate borrows or saves in the first period. Our main aim is to find the value of C1. So given this function here, we can substitute it into our budget constraint to find the value of C1. So we have our budget constraint as C1 plus 1 over 1.2 C2 being equal to 240 plus 1 over 1.2240. Now we know this bit is equal to 440. And then now we know C2 is equal to 0.72 C1. So we'll just substitute this to get C1 plus 1 divided by 1.2 multiplied by 0.72 C1 being equal to 440. So C1 is equal to 440 divided by 1.6, which is equal to 275. So net consumption in the first month is 275. Now, given that net income in the first month is 240, and his consumption is 275, it means that in the first month, Nate had to borrow the difference between his income and his consumption to fund his current consumption. So this is going to be minus 35. So Nate borrowed an amount of £35 in the first month to fund his current consumption. So as we stated in our previous lesson, if the consumption was smaller than 240, then it means Nate saved in the first month. But because the consumption in the first period is bigger than the income in that first period, then it means Nate borrowed to fund his current consumption. So this is all that we have, looking at some practice questions on intertemporal choice. In our next lesson, we'll be starting our lesson on choice and uncertainty. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.